Hello and welcome to the Inside Elland Road Podcast. I'm Chris O'Connor, and as always, I'm joined by Graham Smith. Graham, how have you found the international break?
Insufferable, thanks. I hate them with a passion. Even though Northern Ireland, did me proud really with what we were up to with the international break, at least for a long section of that Germany game. I don't know. I can't abide them. I know that last week, the first week of the international break, we at least had the transfer deadline day stuff to talk about, and that kind of filtered through. But then, I don't know. I've just find myself a bit lost with club football. Is that a sad thing to admit to, Chris, for a man with 4 kids?
I was literally reflecting on this recently that, when you look at your calendar, I sync all the Leeds United fixtures in my calendar. And just seeing that empty space on it just immediately depresses me. It did make me reflect on how much of my kind of happiness of the week is often pinned at the upcoming Leeds fixture, rightly or wrongly. And I was thinking as well, I had a thought, am I a sad little man who's just looking forward to the next Leeds game? So now, I echo your sentiment. I think most football fans do. Does anyone like international breaks? Do even the international players like international breaks?
Yeah, I do wonder that sometimes. I mean, I tried to get my fix. I watched Scotland-Denmark, probably one of the worst decisions I've ever made in my life. That was a truly, truly honking game. Watched Northern Ireland play. I'm really enjoying the fact that the games are all on the BBC and so accessible. That's been great. Didn't watch any England, had no real interest in that. I did tune in to Wales v Canada because there was obviously a little bit of narrative there, a little bit of Leeds involvement. Charlie Crew, got to go watch him make a start at international level. Thought he did okay, actually, against Canada. Dan James played as well. Carl Darlow was rested for that game, which is probably a good thing, as we'll come on to discuss. And Rodon missed it with concussion protocol. So, yeah, I got a little bit of football in, but I don't know. It just felt like the Premier League had only just got started and then it stopped. I don't know. I don't like the timing of the September break. Given how little football really has been played before it all grinds to a halt. But I think what it did do is give Daniel Farke a little bit of space between the transfer window, transfer deadline day, and meeting the press again. Because I wonder, had we interviewed him the morning after the deadline day, I wonder if he might have had a slightly different edge or tone to his voice.
Should we move on to his press conference then and just leave the international break there? Do you want to start with injuries first? I think Lucas Perri was the name a lot of us were worried about because there was a few things floating around. Have you got an update on that?
Yeah, so Perri reported a problem with his quad after the Newcastle game. Now, it sounds like a strain rather than a tear, which is good news, but he is going to miss 2 games, the Fulham game and the Wolves game. And then Leeds are back to their championship goalkeeping duo, and it brings into light transfer deadline day again, because obviously there was interest in Meslier, and then Meslier didn't go, and we asked why. We were told it needed to make sense for both the player and the club, Leeds United, and it hadn't made sense for both parties, so he stayed. I think now we can see that in a slightly different light, because with Perri injured, Darlow steps in, Meslier is on the bench, and they need him in that role, because beyond him, Alex Cairns, who's really been in a, more of a player coach role than really a player in contention of getting starts. So I think that was in their thinking, really, with the uncertainty at that stage. They would have been uncertain as to how bad Perry's injury was, so it made sense, I think, to keep Meslier around just to keep a fuller complement of goalkeepers. But it does mean that Carl Darlow is back between the sticks. How do you feel about that?
I guess as a keeper, it's one of those positions where you're often clouded by your most recent kind of error. And because Sheffield Wednesday is still so fresh in many of our minds, that's just the first thing that jumps into my head. And I just thought, oh no. Obviously, that's kind of like my emotional side. I'm sure, when I think more about it, when he came in for Meslier, it felt like a very important decision the club made at a really crucial time. And a lot of people felt like they took too long making it. And that's Daniel Farke I'm talking about. So I'm not very confident about it, but equally, what else can we do? And he's a perfectly capable keeper. And I hope he can prove himself. I'm not as confident I would be with Perri. Yeah, I guess that's where I land on it. I don't want to write him off based on that error, but it was a pretty bad one, and that's kind of our last memory of him.
Yeah, I mean, you are only really as good as your last game in a lot of people's eyes, aren't you? And that's fairly understandable when it comes to a goalkeeper. I think last season when he came in the Championship, he largely did what he had to do. There were still a couple of little moments where you thought, "Oh, that was slightly shaky," or I would have liked him to be a bit more certain with that. But he just needed to come in and calm everything down, not make any terrible, hilarious gaffes, and just be solid enough. That was what everyone needed, because the goalkeeper position was causing panic attacks for half the fan base, and that wasn't good because you felt the nerves in the stadium. I remember when Meslier was under a big high ball, and you could actually hear like 30,000 people go, "Ooh," like make this really uncertain, horrible noise. And that translates to the game, so they needed to take that narrative away. I agree that it took too long to get to that point. I think Farke was too patient, far too patient with Meslier. But when Darlow came in, I thought he did okay. I was speaking to a goalkeeper coach at a Premier League club, and he was saying about how the fans seem to be a bit about Perri, particularly with his kick in it. But he felt that Darlow was a very, very capable player, even at this level. But he just hasn't played at this level for a long time. He hasn't played regular Premier League football for a very long time. So it's a big test, and it's a big, big responsibility, because whereas in the Championship, if Leeds dropped points, which didn't happen very often, you were pretty confident, because of what we'd seen from in the Farke era, that they would just come straight back and put together another pretty good run of games, performances, results. In the Premier League, it's a bit different. Each game is so important because every single point is so precious. So there's a bit of a different dynamic and a different pressure to this for Darlow than I think even there was last season.
Yeah, and I think actually, if you were going to pick a fixture to throw him into, I'd think straight away, firstly, I'd probably want an away game. Just I think, like you said, if the ground get nervous early on, you can just feel it so much in Elland Road. And of all the places to go, I'd say the one I described the least as a cauldron would probably be Fulham. In some respects, it's not the worst fixture to come up for him. And it puts me at ease, actually, you saying that someone in the kind of goalkeeping business thinks he's very capable at this level. So I immediately feel a little bit less worried. But it just feels like with Leeds United, you can never, every time you feel like, okay, I know what's coming up. We didn't have the best window. Let's look at the next two fixtures. You just hear that Perri's injured, and you just think, put your phone down and just go for a long walk. But it wasn't all bad news. On Ampadu and Tanaka, there seem to be some positives that they might be in the mix. At least there'll be some late fitness tests.
Joined in with large parts of team training, which I think is incredibly positive news. Also, when you think about knee injuries, you don't tend to think like 3 weeks, 4 weeks, do you? You think more longer term. And I know with Ampadu that he bounces back incredibly quickly, and we've discussed how he doesn't really seem to need much time to bed himself back in. And he probably pushes himself incredibly hard as well. He seems like that kind of character. But the fact that they're both back in team training is really, really encouraging, because one or both could potentially travel to Fulham. I don't think they would start. But to have them available, I mean, maybe Ampadu would start. I don't know. Like he is Mr. Durable, isn't he? So maybe he's got a chance. But Farke did also caveat it with perhaps neither will travel. We'll make a late decision. We'll see how their bodies react. There's time between now and the game to make a full assessment of where they are physically and whether or not they can play. But having them around the squad, I think, would be very, very good for the team. Having Ampadu around particularly, but having Tanaka on the bench as an option, as a slightly more forward-thinking midfield option in particular, that would go down very well, I think.
Yeah, I'm not as concerned after the Newcastle game about the midfield three as I was prior to it. Like I said, I think Gruev stepped in and actually did a really good job. I did hear someone say they thought Gruev was injured because he didn't take part for Bulgaria, but then looking into it, it seemed like he maybe has fallen out with the manager. I don't know if you have anything on that to add, but he's not an injury concern.
No, there was a bit of a weird one. I didn't deal with that story, but one of my colleagues did. But it did sound like a bit of a weird situation. But no, he wasn't included in Farke's question marks, unless he was just terribly forgetful. The question marks he does have are over Lucas Nemeka and Joel Perri. Nemeka took a kick on his foot in training. Perri took a kick to the calf. Who is going around kicking everyone? Who's kicking people at Thorpe Arch? Who do we reckon it is? Who's the angriest man? Possibly Rodon. Beal. It's most likely to be Beal, isn't it? Because it's two forwards that have picked up a kick, and we know from when I interviewed Nemeka and Perri, both of them said that Beal does like to leave one on you late. So, but really, if you're Beal, you really need to be leaving one on a centre half, don't you? Because that's your route into the team.
He's got that wrong. I think if this is a Netflix true crime, we're going to be looking at motive. And Beal not starting is probably, making a bit more angry. But he's picked the wrong victim, hasn't he? You want to be leaving one on Rodon or Strike. But so that would tell me that Calvert-Lewin's probably in line for his first start for Leeds in the Premier League. Is that what we're thinking?
I don't see why not at this stage. He's a month into team training, isn't he? He didn't have pre-season. They will be cautious with him because if he breaks down earlier in the season, then the decision to sign him suddenly looks pretty terrible. You absolutely have to manage him and you have to make sure that you get the most possible minutes out of him across the season. You can't just think we need a striker for Fulham. It has to be we need a striker that can play a lot of minutes between now and the end of the season. So I think if they do take that decision, they'll be very, very careful with it. But Nemeka, he's played a fair bit. His match fitness would be probably sharper because he's had a longer pre-season as well. If he's only had a little kick, I don't know that it would rule him out of starting. So I think there's still a little bit of intrigue there as far as Fulham go in terms of predicting what Farke might do. I'm interested again in the centre-half position, and if Beal is kept out, Farke, he made a big thing about going to Arsenal and keeping that winning formula he talked about. They kept a clean sheet against Newcastle and the centre backs were pretty solid. Stroik got a couple of little moments, I guess, but they were pretty solid, and that's another clean sheet. Very, very interesting if he keeps the same centre-half pairing. And at what point, does Beal actually get in the team? They signed him to play. When does he play?
I guess it's a good problem to have if we keep keeping clean sheets and Beal can't get in. But the likelihood will be that there will probably be some games further down the line, or maybe even on the weekend, where we do concede and look ropey, and I'm sure he'll slot straight in after that. And I still think in most Leeds fans' minds, we'll be thinking Rodon and Beal are the first choice. Well, certainly with the pedigree Beal had, he was one of those signings I was quite excited about. Probably him, Stack, and Perri were the three that you thought, they're going to be starters, definitely.
Does it surprise you that Anton Stack is placed number 2 in the Premier League's chances created table? Only Bruno Fernandes has got more chances created this season than Anton Stack. That baffled me. And they haven't been big chances, like the big golden ones that a player has to absolutely put away. But even the fact that he's created 10, I know he takes set pieces too, but that surprised me a little bit.
I think I'd struggle to think of 10 chances we've had this season.
Yeah.
So to think of 10 that he's created, I did see that actually, and it did surprise me. But equally, I guess it suggests that they can't all be set pieces, that, he's quite progressive with his passing. He gives something else rather than just a kind of destroyer. He's got a box-to-box side to his game. He hasn't quite hit the heights as he has pre-season. But I'm wondering in these next few games, there's an opportunity for him to settle in and start to show some of his quality, because it's definitely there. And I think he could be the pick of the signings when we review the season further down the line. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, or what you're seeing from him, or the creativity that seems to be hidden.
I really, really liked his performance against AC Milan. I thought he was excellent in that game. I don't think I've been quite as struck with his performances since. Like, I've not thought, God, he was brilliant. Longstaff was the shining example, I think, against Newcastle. And, just going off that one game is foolish. But if Longstaff plays like that more often than not, I think he'll be signing of the season. I just think with his Premier League experience as well, and I think that could be really, really valuable, in finding ways to win games or in rustling the opposition, to the point that it really starts to upset them. I think Longstaff could be the one. He could be the surprise one, that maybe people slept on him a little bit when he was signed. And I just wonder if he might be the Rothwell of the group, the one that kind of surpasses all expectations. But we'll see. Very, 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 very small sample size to be going off, and it's all very speculative at this stage. But in terms of his team selection, there are a few choices to make if people are, a little bit struggling a little bit with kicks or knocks. The midfield probably picks itself again, though.
In terms of midfield, hearing you talk about Longstaff there, I've gone back and forth. If everyone's fit, I actually don't know who the best midfield three are. There's quite. I can make a case for four of them almost definitely starting, but then I have to pick three from that four. I think Ampadu starts for me definitely, but then who am I dropping out of Stack, Tanaka, and Longstaff? If you're right, like Longstaff plays like he did against Newcastle, I think it's a really good problem to have. And I don't actually know where I land on the best midfield three. I guess the game you're playing might dictate whether you start Tanaka or not. I guess that's the one way I would look at it. That perhaps he's maybe more creative and not as physical as the others. And that's not saying he doesn't put himself about, which he does. He runs and he tackles. But I guess the other three probably lend themselves to more of a battle if you know you're going to be one of those games where you've really got to grind it out. But it's a good problem to have. And again, it reflects quite well on the early part of the recruitment. Now, if we talk about the late part of the recruitment, Daniel Farke was very clear before the window of what he thinks his team needed. That didn't come to pass. How has he responded to that? And could you read between the lines in anything he was saying?
There was a couple of lines, there was a little couple of times that I thought, that's quite clever that he's brought that up. Does he mean to be that clever, or is he just being, completely transparent, open, honest, and transparent, as he likes to say? Firstly, he started off by saying, "Look, I'm not going to talk nonsense and try and pretend that we didn't want players in, because we did." But at the same time, he was very quick to try and move on from it. We didn't get the player. You're not going to hear me moan about it. I was absolutely certain he would say, "But we don't complain about this," because he says it all the time. He didn't say it. Slightly disappointed, but he did say, "You're not going to hear me say a bad word. You're not going to hear me moan and be negative. What would that say to my current players?" And that is it. That is a good point. If he was labouring the point, we didn't get enough. Firstly, he's setting himself on a collision course with the 49ers. Secondly, he's saying to the dressing room, "You lot are nowhere near good enough to keep us up. We are in trouble here." And he can't afford really to do either of those things. He has to keep the owners as sweet as humanly possible, because I think, in terms of a leash, in the Championship, Daniel Farke is the man that you want, undoubtedly. He's the specialist. He is the one that if you hire him and give him a decent squad, he's going to get results. He knows exactly how to get results in that division, and he did it with Leeds over 2 seasons, and the second time he went up. In the Premier League, you're a lot less certain that he is the man to get you the results. And so I think the leash that he's on is a lot shorter, just as it probably is for, I don't know, goodness knows how many managers in the Premier League. We've already seen one go that was a complete surprise move. Well, not a surprise move, because I think that ownership could do just about anything, could be responsible for just about anything. But I don't think that should have happened. I think, given what Forest did last season, it's insane to get rid of him. But it just goes to show that anyone can get the bullet in the Premier League when it comes to managers. So I do think he's on a shorter leash. I do think he might be more mindful or better advised to keep everybody on side. And I wonder if that was maybe at the heart of how diplomatic he was when it came to talking about the transfer deadline day. What was your initial take?
I thought he actually dealt with the questions very well in his answers. Though he did give one answer that actually made me think about it all in a worse way. I think he said, "I've seen all the comments that people are saying that 3 years ago we had the same wingers, and we're worse off now, or something along those lines. That we had the same wingers, wasn't enough then, and that we had Sinistera, Ruta, and Somerville." And I thought, oh my god, I actually didn't think about it like that. And I hadn't seen that comment. I know people were saying that we were probably worse off than last season, but I hadn't actually done it from the last Premier League season. He's right. So I was actually more concerned from that comment. But he is right. Like you said, I don't know if sometimes he was playing an unbelievable kind of 4D chess game with some of his answers. Or
that was the answer that I thought. Honest. That was the one that made me think, oh, is that a little... Has he just sent one past the 49ers' ears there just to just to let them know he's there? Or is he just being, completely open and look, like, these are facts. It's not like he's spinning anything here. He's literally talking facts. But then I also thought that he took quite a lot of it on himself and put it on his shoulders and said, it's up to me. My job is not to complain or talk about how Leeds need to make my life easier. My job's to make the best of what I've got. So that's why I asked him what his actual plan was. What's that look like? And he said, being positive, leading from the front. Team processes will be super, super important. So the team knows how they're attacking and they know the style inside out. Set pieces, he mentioned himself. I didn't have to bring it up this week. He ran through a list of things, and ultimately between now and January, this is his squad. This is what he's got. He's going to have to get the best out of it. And it's going to come down to coaching, preparation, player management, fitness management, and then the players he's got proving people wrong, proving that those question marks over their heads are unfair or unwarranted, because there's a lot of question marks, a lot that need to be cleared up if before we see this team stay in the Premier League.
Did he say that he showed some of the players some of the negative criticism about them? Did I read that bit correctly? That he was telling them that people are saying you're not good enough as like a motivational tool? Was that something he actually mentioned?
Yeah, he intimated that he tells his players to be motivated by stuff like that. But I don't know that he's specifically gone, DJ, have you seen what John Beeston 372 on X.com has said about you? That would be absolutely remarkable if he had a slideshow put together of all the worst comments. Just
slagging you off.
Yeah. It's called you little slugs. Yeah, that would be incredible. But I think they would be insane if they didn't. They all say, Ilya Gruev said it right when we got him in the mix zone after Newcastle, and he was saying he tries not to read too much media because after a bad game, everyone's saying you're the worst, and after a game where you win but you're just okay, everyone might go the other way completely, and you don't want your mood to be that up and down. I always bring it back to the one example I saw in sport was Rory McIlroy in a Ryder Cup, where he was just so up and down, like he was living on every moment. And if it was going well, he was flying. If it wasn't going well, it was like the world was caving in. You can't be like that. And yeah, this team, I don't think Farke would let his team be like that. So I think a lot of them will do their own kind of blocking out of what's being said in the narrative. At the same time, they all watch Sky Sports. They're all on Instagram, and they follow football. The vast majority of them follow football, so they know that the predictions are being made, and they're being tipped for relegation, and people are saying they're not going to be enough. A lot of them probably watch deadline day coverage to see what's going on, no matter what they'll tell you. And so they've got to know. They've got to be. They might not be aware of what individuals are saying about them, but they will know what the overall narrative is. And I think that's probably what Farke is using. I could imagine a scenario where he says X, Y, and Z have tipped us. 17 out of 18 pundits have tipped us for the drop. So it's up to us to go and prove them wrong. And maybe that can be a motivation. Maybe it can be a Leeds United against the world thing, which I think has worked for this club in the past.
Yeah, I think that all plays into something else you mentioned about team spirit. And part of his job is to try and cultivate that. And if he is going down the angle of the world against Leeds, there's certainly a history of that he can pull upon. And that's something which you can kind of get Elland Road to buy into, I guess, as well. That, no one likes us, we don't care kind of thing, to quote a phrase from Millwall. But yeah, and it's going to be really important. That team spirit and collectiveness is going to be a massive factor in how this club navigates this season, I think, more so than previous seasons, because the quality last season could probably get you through certain games, even if you weren't at your best. But you feel like this season, you've got to be trying to get the best out of you every single game in order to get enough points to stay up. So that kind of cohesiveness, and he mentioned running, didn't he, and fitness. And I liked his answers in that respect. I think that he is looking at the right things. He hasn't yet reached out to me about the O'Connor, but that's fine. It's still there. The offer still stands. And that was one of many. I think Human Pyramid was mentioned. The Invisible Man, that was one of mine as well. I am waiting for a call. But yeah, look, they're leaving no stone unturned. I thought he dealt with the answers probably as well as you could do in the situation, because he didn't lie. He didn't say, he didn't, sometimes they try and rewrite history and say that they didn't say what they did. He was very honest and open that he was clear about what he wanted. We didn't get it. So he has to deal with reality as it is. And mentioning the kind of managerial situation, I do sometimes despair when I log in and people are already linking people to the Leeds job. Nuno's now free, Mourinho, that I'm just not a fan of. It does seem like in the modern world, you are basically in the Premier League just one bad run away from being sacked. And I don't think I like that. I don't know where you stand. I feel like he has enough credit in the bank to get at least 10 games. If we get 1 point for the next 3, I wouldn't be sacking him. If he gets 2 points for the next 6, maybe you have to start thinking about it. But I think he's earned the right to have a few games. I don't like this kind of short-termism that's kind of everywhere in football these days. You might disagree, being a Rangers fan at the moment, but yeah. Do you think the 49ers are part of the ecosystem of basically one bad run of 3 or 4 games and he's out the door?
I would be surprised if they were different, because there's so much at stake. There's just the way the Premier League has been allowed to develop. It's now the absolute be all and end all. And it is so heavily linked to a club's success financially. And, the investors in the 49ers Enterprises investment vehicle, the vast majority of them want to see a return, right? They want to see results. They want Leeds to be a Premier League club. The stadium development is linked to staying in the Premier League, and there's good reasons for that, because Leeds in the Championship over the last few years, thanks to Bielsa largely, have been selling out the stadium again, and he kind of reconnected the city with its club and relit a fire underneath it. But if you were in the doldrums for a long period of time with a succession of managers that didn't grab the fans, a succession of squads that didn't have the right characters in it or whatever else, it feels like you're never that far away from, apathy setting in the modern game. And I think all of that makes me think that Parag Marathi and the 49ers will be just as ruthless as any other ownership. I mean, what evidence have we got to suggest that they would be different and they would be more patient, or they would stick with the process with this manager than any other ownership group?
Well, I guess Russell Martin is still in the job. He's had a pretty disastrous start. So if I'm Farke, if they call me up and if they're giving any indication of, really sorry, Daniel, I'd just go, whoa. I'd be going, let's look at Russell Martin's first 2 games in charge and using that as my first line of defence. But no, you're probably right. I am a football romantic and optimist, and I'm probably not a realist when it comes to football.
I'm not saying it's necessarily right. Like, I'm not saying that's the way football should be. Yeah. There have been managerial sackings, and I've thought, like, dear God, that's absolutely insane. I mean, Maybe Ruben Sellés is going to prove us all very, very wrong, but that decision at Sheffield United looks laughable now. Chris Wilder would not have Sheffield United sat bottom of the Championship table. That wouldn't happen. It's just, it wouldn't happen. And maybe they're going through the pain, of a transformation, and when they transform into whatever Sellés wants. But you talk to Blades fans right now, and the vast majority of those I've spoken to are pulling their hair out, and they would like him gone. I mean, they've been singing it to him at games, sacked in the morning. And sometimes you think you really have shot yourselves in the foot there when they make. I mean, I think the Forest thing has the potential to go very, very badly wrong. Does Postecoglou strike you as a man who would bite his tongue? If things that were going on around him or above him were a bit insane? I don't know that he is.
I saw a quote from him already today in answer to a question about, you said you always win a trophy in your second season. How about your first? And he said, I did the double at Celtic my first season. And then he said, I might have to win one in my first season here to keep the job. And I just thought, I'm not sure this is the ownership you should be making jokes like that about. But the thing is, looking at Forest, I don't want to be Nottingham Forest. I don't want to be a kind of club where you just don't know what's going to happen one week to the next. And I felt Leeds United have been like that for too much of my life. And even you mentioned Ruben Sellés. He did a great job at Reading when they were a kind of basket case off the field. And he was sacked by Hull unfairly, I thought. So I think he's got some quite good pedigree. I'm not going to say he's going to turn it around there, but I think he's been a bit unfairly treated. I think he's a good coach. And I don't want to be Hull either. They sacked him and look where they are. And I can really see the Nottingham Forest decision going badly. I'm more optimistic about them struggling down the bottom now than I was before he was sacked. And that's good for Leeds, ultimately.
But then there's also examples of clubs leaving it too late, missing the window of opportunity. I can think of a club that had a World Cup inserted into a season as a natural firebreak that would have quite literally provided a pre-season for a new manager ahead of a January transfer window that a new manager could have used to make the squad better. And Leeds United did not take that opportunity. And Radrizzani said it himself now, hasn't he? He's quite actually been quoted as saying, I should have sacked Jesse Marsh. The Liverpool game swayed everyone, and it's a bit of a cautionary tale that sometimes there is a window of opportunity that you can't miss if you want to try and resurrect a season. But I think for Leeds, 4 points in Daniel Farke's back pocket already is a really solid start. Like, I think that if I was Farke, I'd be absolutely delighted with that and think if I can add, if we can say Leeds can draw against Fulham, right, and beat Wolves, I mean, you're off to a flyer, like an actual flyer. I mean, how long did it take Southampton last season to get going at all? I mean, did they ever get going? But they were on like 4 points for a long time. They're on 6 points maybe still by, I don't want to say November. Like, and Leicester and Ipswich weren't a great deal better. Even by the end of the calendar year, they were, struggling. And if he can look at this next run of games, if he can pick up a decent chunk of points, I think then the whole 10 games thing is no longer the boogeyman that it would be for other managers, because he will have already have bought himself a load of time, a load of credit in the bank. But he's got to get the attack clicking. He's got to get goals going in. He's got to make them dangerous from open play in a way they haven't been yet. And they've got to get set pieces working for them. If they can keep as defensively sound as they have been in the 2 home games, certainly, then I think he's off to a winner. I think he's given himself every chance of certainly seeing January. How depressing is that? We're like 3 games in and like talking about, just making it to January as a manager. But that's the modern game. That's the Premier League.
Yeah. And I think you're right about the next few games being crucial. If we got 4 points in the next two games, I think we'd all be slapping 5. Do you know what I mean? We would all be absolutely delighted with how it's gone. For those who aren't aware, I'm referring to, because you mentioned Jesse Marsch, it did come into my head again. His comments post Wales game his comments post Wales game responding to Bellamy being annoyed at them celebrating for the end of the final whistle. And do you want to, can you do the full quote?
No, all I remember is the crime of the phrase slapping 5. Yeah, it's funny that game because, friendly and all that, but so many yellow cards. Marsh got a yellow card. Teams were at each other, which is great to see for an international friendly. But you could tell there was a bit of needle already. And then Jesse's gone round slapping 5 with it. I can't use it serious. I cannot as a man of my age and cultural background and lineage, I cannot ever hope to get away with saying that in any serious way. And nor should he.
Can anyone?
Can anyone? No, it's not something I ever want to hear again in the game. I would like it if FIFA would take a look at this. I know that football's authorities have got their hands full looking at charges on all kinds of things at the minute, but I do think this is an issue that needs to be stamped out pretty quickly. But if I was Craig Bellamy and I looked across and they're all high-fiving and slapping each other on the back and the game's not done yet, I would be absolutely incensed. I'd be off to the car to get a golf club straight away. And I'm not really surprised that he's then said he'd like to see him again in the World Cup. I wonder what Jesse thought of that comment.
Yeah, it's amazing. And like you said, a lot of needle for a friendly. Can you imagine an away dugout doing that Elland Road in the 91st minute with 4 minutes injury time if they were all celebrating? It could be a riot.
Yeah, it's bold. It is certainly bold. He's a manager that loves high-fiving people. I remember once in the corridor at Thorpe Arch.
What do you mean by high-fiving? I don't know that term.
So, when you slap hands with someone, as footballers do, and they kind of cup their hand, and you almost form like a fist between yourselves, like one really powerful hand. Marsh held out his hand to do that in Thorpe Arch, and we connected in such a way with our hands that the noise was one of the best things I've ever heard in my life. It's probably it's the best thing I've ever heard around Jesse Marsh, because we did hear some scarcely believable stuff. But yeah, that slapping 5, I will never call it that. My children will never call it that, and I would hope that none of our listeners would either.
If we're talking about characters in the game who perhaps don't say the right things, I think it's quite a nice segue into Mateo Joseph. You had you had a bit of a write-up on him in the international break. Do you want to let our listeners know his recent interview and what he had to say about our lovely city of Leeds?
Yeah, so Mateo Joseph at Mallorca now on loan. Obviously, the backdrop to this is that he came back from the Euro 21s, just like Willy Gnonto did. But he told Daniel Farke he wasn't ready to go to Stockholm to play against Man United. And that was the first enormous red flag. Because a youngster should not be taking himself out of contention. What a game to play in as well. Even if you are in the back of your head thinking, I got to get out of here to get minutes, which is perfectly reasonable, right? That's fine to think that. But to not look at that game and think, if I can impress against Manchester United in front of a massive crowd in a big preseason game, then that'll do my chances of getting a move wonders. You're basically putting yourself in the window in a big way. But not only that, he then went against his manager's advice and wishes and did not come to Germany to take part in preseason training. I don't know if you'd use the phrase down tools, but if you're not using the tools that the universe or your parents or your creator or whatever has given you to play football, if you're not actually using those, then you have essentially laid them down. and you're training on your own or with the 21s back at Thorpe Arch when you should be involved in the senior squad. It sounds like Leeds' plan was to keep him, not to sell him. And then they essentially decided, well, Daniel Farke decided he's not going to be part of my plans now because he's talked himself out of it. So he's gone off to Mallorca on loan, which is a very, very important thing to stress. Mateo Joseph, whether he knows it or not, is on loan to Mallorca. He returns
he's on loan from Leeds United.
From Leeds United, his parent club. When he returns at the end of this season, it will be to Leeds United, the club that actually owns him. And he still has until 2028 on his contract. So he's done an interview with a Mallorcan outlet, and he was asked what it was like living in Leeds. A wide-ranging interview. Loads of stuff that he said was absolutely fine. And they asked him what it was like living in Leeds, and he's used the phrase, not the prettiest place. Now, sometimes the reaction to things that are said is massively overblown, right? And people go too far, and people are looking for offence. Don't go after a Yorkshireman's surrounds. You do not tell people in Yorkshire that Yorkshire is not the prettiest place. But it's wrong. Like, it's okay to have an opinion, but his opinion is a wrong one. If he was living near the training ground, unless he'd find himself a flat that was part of the prison, like, he's probably driving in past some really nice countryside. It's lovely around there, like Boston Spa, coming across that. If you don't like coming in the other way, come in via Boston Spa, go over the lovely bridge with the river. Like, it's one of the most picturesque drives to a training ground that I could possibly think you could enjoy. And of course, because he said it, it's out there. It gets back to home soil, to ears here. And it just makes things even more difficult for a player whose reputation has already been dragged through the mud with the fans of the club that owns him. And I just think someone other than Ant and Deck needs to get in an earpiece in his ear and start talking him through interviews and his conduct and what he does, because it's, I don't know, just so ill-advised.
Yeah, or perhaps we could do a shout out for pretty areas of Yorkshire and Leeds, and we can maybe get a list over to him. It does make you think, are footballers, who advises them? Did he have a PR person sitting in that room and just like head in hands after? It's just.
He is 21, isn't he? Like this.
Yeah.
So that's the other thing. When I was 21, I was finishing off journalism studies in Sheffield. I can only imagine the amount of guff that would have come out of my mouth if somebody had interviewed me about life choices or whatever. But at the same time, he's been in this industry for a long time. His family are well versed in this industry. Emil Heskey's his uncle. He's got cousins that play. He's been in and around the senior setup at Leeds, in and around the likes of Stuart Dallas for a time, the likes of Ethan Ampadu, Joe Rodon, some like really experienced veteran players. And he's been in and around senior characters and, the media team at Leeds and all of that. He knows how the business works. When you do an interview, it goes out there and everyone hears it and reads it. And there's just things you don't need to say. Like, I feel like he walked into silliness, a really silly situation of his own creation there that was just so needless. Just say, great place, great people, loved it there, but I felt it was best for me to move on. Just be a little bit diplomatic. I mean, I feel like he's gone in two-footed on the place. Like, but why? Why would you say that?
Didn't you say as well, there's not much to do? Was that one of the comments? Or, it's just...
Yeah, that must have stung for you. That must have really stung for you, because as somebody who had a play on this summer, he could have quite easily got himself down to the Playhouse and whiled away an evening watching...
It's literally what I do is create stuff to do in Yorkshire. So he's just absolutely slagged me off there. I don't know if it is aimed at me, Matteo, if you're listening, none taken. And look, I don't want to throw him on the bus either. He is a young player, but you are right. being around the game for as long as he has and having the kind of voices in the ear that he will have, you just think it was a poor choice of words, and it's just not helping him unless he's playing 4D chess and thinking, right, if I just keep slacking them off, there's no way they can take me back and it will get me a move. Now I'm overthinking every single football cliche, and whether it's people far more intelligent than I can even imagine playing the game in a way I can't. But yeah, a bad interview. Let's move on to Fulham then. What are your thoughts, predictions? We've talked about some of the questions. So Darla will start. Tanaka, Ampadu, probably unlikely, but they may make the bench, which means midfield probably picks itself. I guess the Perot Nemecha DCL thing will probably pick itself by who's the fittest. If it's only DCL, then he will start. But if Nemecha's fit, you could probably see him starting and then maybe giving Calvert-Lewin a good half hour, 45 minutes if he still can't play a full 90. But yeah, I think Leeds have to be targeting this game as a game that they can win. Fulham have had the best start, but I think it's a try and win, but do not lose. And a point is great going on to Wolves and then Bournemouth at home. What do you think? Do you think they can win? Have you got a prediction? I'm going 2-1 Leeds. I'm not going to lie. I'm going to continue with my picking Leeds to win.
Okay. I'm going to say 1-1. And I would be absolutely thrilled with that if I was Leeds United. Depending on how the game goes, of course. If they hit the crossbar 7 times and draw 1-1, then they'll not be very happy, will they? But Fulham, I've got lots of good players. You know, you look at the goal that was so cruelly stripped of them, and that to me is what Fulham can do to you. You know, they've got really powerful athletes. They've got pace. I love Calvin Bassey. You know, he was obviously at Rangers, and he's an athlete, but he's very, very, very good at football as well. And they've got players like that with athleticism and skill who can hurt you. Iwobi can be dangerous. Sessegnon can be dangerous. Then you got Muniz, you know, the former Leeds United player. Spent all summer basically being a Leeds United player, didn't he? Until such a time as Fulham were like, no, actually, we've never intended to sell him to you. And Harry Wilson as well. I mean, could you see Harry Wilson scoring from a free kick? I definitely could. Maybe that's why Fulham's goal comes.
Yeah, the narrative side of my brain is often going in football games, you know, where you're thinking about how would you script it? And you could imagine the kind of football gods would be scripting a last minute Harry Wilson goal. But yeah, I hope that isn't the case. I think it is a fixture Leeds need to target as one they can get points in. But I think you're right. You've got to be very wary of the threats. You didn't even mention Smith Rowe, who I think is an excellent player, but he doesn't even really get a start for them these days. So they do have threats all over the pitch and on the bench. I don't think they will get many situations like they did for that goal that was ruled out against Chelsea against us. I don't think we will be as stretched as Chelsea were in that situation. So, you know, it's not like you want to always watch performances like Everton and Newcastle in terms of entertainment, but you could see the game going very much along similar lines. A game, a few chances, and hopefully Leeds can show more with the ball and try and utilise some set pieces if we get them. But yeah, you can imagine it's going to be a game of few scoring chances. You know, hopefully Stat can create another 4 or 5 chances as he does every game, as we all know. But yeah, I'm going to go 2-1 Leeds, and I would take 1-1 though right now if you're offering it to me.
Do you want them to go after Fulham and try and play maybe a little bit like they tried to play at Arsenal so famously, or do you want to see them set up to be horrible?
You're asking me. So I was one of the fans who was still in the away end at Liverpool when we were 6-0 down, chanting Bielsa's name. Like, I go to be entertained. I want to be entertained when I watch football. That's one of my number one things. I don't mind. I felt like there was a huge shift towards the results first business in that kind of Mourinho era where football seemed to be so turgid and was trying about grinding out 1-0s and being resolute and solid. And I understand that from a financial perspective. I want to go and attack teams and be entertained, and I still want to win games. But yeah, so you're asking me, I'm a football romantic. I'm going 3 at the back, 2 in midfield, 5 attackers. I'm doing what Farke did when we were 2-0 down away at Norwich. That's how I would start games if I was playing Championship Manager. No, I am joking. But yeah, look, I want to see us play good football. And I think we are capable of that. I think in the friendlies and even in the Everton game, there were bits of passing which I really liked, like quick passing moves. If we can continue that and start carving some really good chances from some of those moves, I'll be happy. So I don't think we should go and completely park the bus. I think we should try and go and play football. And I think Farke would agree. I think he's been very clear about he's got his own brand of football he likes. And it's not completely park the bus and try and put 10 men behind the ball and not be adventurous in any way. I don't know if you have any thoughts on whether you'd go completely defensive or you'd take the game by the horns and go from the off and play.
I wouldn't go totally defensive. I'd go very, very compact and very direct. But if you're going to go very direct, you need Dominic Calvert-Lewin or you need Nemeka up top, particularly against the likes of Bassi and Anderson. Who'll probably be the other centre back. But yeah, I'd probably be looking to win ugly. I think I'd be a pragmatist. Apologies to Marcelo Bielsa, but I just think points are going to be so vital. I almost feel like get through this season, and then we can start to think about entertainment.
You are right. That's probably why I'm not a football manager and never will be. But it's also why I love Bielsa so much. Even when we were getting hammered, it was just kind of hilarious to try and take on Man City away when they put 7 past us. And even in some of the games like that Spurs game, we lost by 4. I think Leeds could have scored 5 in that game, if I remember rightly. It was they seemed to score every chance they had. But yeah, the rational part of my brain agrees with you that you set up be quite hard to beat. Obviously, you want to have an idea of what you're doing with the ball, but you're also going to be looking to use set pieces. I'm intrigued by his next run of fixtures. I think it will give us a much better sample of where Leeds are at this season. And particularly the 2 away games against sides we should be targeting as games we can possibly get points in, and also against teams who might be in and around the bottom half of the table. It's if you were to put the next 3, right? So looking at the end of September, if you were to put a points target you think Leeds should be aiming at, what would you say? I'd probably say 4 points would be great from those 3 games.
Yeah, absolutely. That puts you on 8, Yeah, definitely. Wolves, I think, is the one you've got to look at and think, come on, let's give ourselves a leg up and also drag them down a bit and make life even worse for them. That's a huge game already a massive, massive game. But like I said, I'd happily take a draw at Craven Cottage. When you go into the Bear Pit and, their fans are right on top of you and, making it so nasty. Truly one of Europe's really raw, raucous dins. So, take a draw.
Yeah, to any Leeds fans who are travelling to Fulham, do stay safe and watch yourselves when you're down there. I think that's a good point to leave it, Graham. We'll check in after Fulham. I wanted to give a quick shout out to an event, and if Matteo Joseph is listening, this is something to do in Leeds and in the region. It's part of an exhibition for a young man, Joshua Van Lieder, who sadly took his own life. And Josh was actually in the Leeds Academy for 10 years, from 5 to 15. And then he ended up playing in America and Australia for a bit. And he had some injuries and sadly led to a kind of decline in his mental health. And he sadly took his own life. But he was a wonderful person, a great human being, also an amazing artist, an amazing kind of poet. And he did a lot to help other people's mental health. So his dad approached me about putting on a play. I did a play about 9 years ago. I think it was first on with Red Ladder Theatre Company. And it's toured in a couple of different versions of it since then. It's gone to Northern Ireland, toured around England. And it's called The Life and Soul. It's about a Leeds United fan again. So if anyone was a fan of Through It All Together, hopefully there'll be some similarities here. If I was a Leeds fan who's basically struggling with his own mental health, and it's all set in a pub, and it's about 35 minutes. And we put a performance on So there's one booked for Tuesday, 23rd of September, which is actually fully booked now. So we've added in another date, and it's Friday, the 26th of September at 6 p.m. And it's part of the JVL exhibition. So if you Google that, joshuavanleader.com/inspire to inspire, the dates are on there. It's on New York Square, so right next to Playhouse. But yeah, it should be a lovely event. And his artwork is amazing, honestly. If you walk around that exhibition and see the work he's done, the words he wrote, a really special person. And I was there for an event last night, actually, and they had pieces of art made by people who'd lost someone. And quite a few of them had, they'd reference the man's name, and they'd have a Leeds badge there or something to do with Leeds and football. And it just reminded me again about football means so much to so many people. It's a big part of who we are and our identity, and it is just a vehicle for connection. So yeah, it's an honour to have something on to kind of commemorate him. And if anyone wants to come along, it'd be great to see some Inside Elland Road fans there. So do say hello. I'll be at both of them. And yeah, hope you all go well this week. Hope Leeds get 3 points, and we'll check in again next week.